Is Egypt always synonymous to the house of bondage? My short answer is no. We have heard a lot of people make this reference, and I want to demonstrate that reading of the text is necessarily not accurate. Let's look at the pshat, the straight reading of the text, not adding anything. Can one demonstrate that Egypt, that is mentioned in Deuteronomy 28:68, is not supposed to be read as it being synonymous to Egypt? Can one demonstrate that? I believe it can be done easily. So, is Egypt always synonymous to bondage? No. We know that Egypt is a country at the northeastern section of Africa, the northeastern corner of Africa, adjacent to Palestine, and through which the Nile flows. We know that. We know that someone from Egypt is called an Egyptian. The first occurrence of this name in the Hebrew scriptures is Genesis 10, where we read, "And the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim." Mizraim. So we see that Mizraim, or Mizraim, however you want to pronounce it, is the grandson of Noah and evidently settled in the land that came to be known as Mizraim to the Hebrews and Egypt to us today. Beautiful. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, we have been told that Egypt is synonymous to bondage. I'm not disputing that. And that is used to read bondage into the text of Deuteronomy 28, verses 68, which states, "And Yah will bring you back to Egypt." Some people read that as bondage in ships. And because ships are mentioned, people associate this as being fulfilled, or, to be fair, also being fulfilled by the transatlantic slave trade, which I disagree. I don't think so. I want to argue against this reading because it's forced and the text does not imply that. The text of the Torah or Tanakh lets us know when Egypt can be read as synonymous to bondage. The text is not shy to tell us that. I believe the text tells us when we can read Egypt as synonymous to bondage and when we can read Egypt as a location. Can one demonstrate that? Easily, I believe. I'm going to give you a few verses to demonstrate that. And then we revisit Deuteronomy 28:68. In Exodus 13, we read, "Moshe said to the people, 'Remember this day when you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.'" The text is not shy to state that. So in this verse, is Egypt synonymous to bondage? Absolutely. In verses 14 of Exodus 13, we read, "And it will come to pass, if your son asks you in the future, saying, 'What is this?' you shall say to him, 'With a mighty hand did Yah take us out of Egypt,'" and it qualifies it, out of the house of bondage. Is this verse that states Egypt synonymous to bondage? Absolutely. Exodus 20. I am Yah, your Elohim, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. In this verse, is Egypt synonymous to bondage? Yes. You can read it as such. The text is not shy to state that. Deuteronomy 5. I am Yah, your Elohim, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. In this verse, is Egypt synonymous to bondage? I don't think anybody has a problem if you read it as such, because the text is not shy to tell us that. Deuteronomy 6. Beware, lest you forget Yah, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Can you read Egypt here as synonymous to bondage? Absolutely. Pay attention. This is the same book of Deuteronomy. In this same book, the text is not shy to state that Egypt is the house of bondage when it wants you or permits you to read it as such. This is the same book, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 8. And your heart grows haughty, and you forget Yah, your Elohim, who has brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Clearly here, Egypt is synonymous to bondage. The text is not shy to tell us that. Deuteronomy 13, we have the same thing. Egypt. And who redeemed you from the house of bondage? Again, the text is not shy to tell us that we can read Egypt as synonymous to bondage here. No problem at all. Deuteronomy 13:11. And you shall stone him with stones so that he dies, because he sought to lead you astray from Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land, there's a land called Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It qualifies it. So clearly, anybody can sit and say in Deuteronomy 13:11, Egypt is synonymous to bondage. I don't think anyone has an issue with that. We see the same in the book of Joshua, Joshua 24. For Yah our Elohim, it is he who brought us out and our fathers up from the land of Egypt. There's a land called Egypt. And then it qualifies it from the house of bondage. So if somebody says Egypt here is synonymous to bondage, I don't think anybody has an issue with that. You're looking at the text is clearly pointing that out. In the book of Judges 28, we have the same thing. That Yah sent a prophet to the children of Israel, and he said to them, Thus says Yah Elohim of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and I brought you out of the house of bondage. So clearly, Egypt is synonymous to bondage. When the text implies that, the text states it. So I don't think anybody would argue that Egypt in this verse here is synonymous to bondage. So what I have done is demonstrated how the text gives us a hint to read in Egypt as synonymous to bondage. Clearly, we have seen it. Now let's go to our main text. What is used by those who read bondage into the text when the text doesn't state that, when the text does not imply that. It's forcing your ideas into the text. Let the text speak. Deuteronomy 28:68. And Yah will bring you back to Egypt in ships. Notice the text doesn't read, and Yah will bring you back to Egypt, to the house of bondage, or, and Yah will bring you back to Egypt, the house of bondage. The text doesn't read that. we have seen that the text is not shy to state that Egypt is the house of bondage. We've seen the text do that several times in the same book of Deuteronomy. Why does the author choose not to qualify Egypt here as the house of bondage? Because clearly the author has done that previously in the same book. The reason is because the author doesn't want you to read Egypt here as bondage. He wants you to read Egypt here as the land of Egypt, the one that is located in the northeastern corner of Africa. That is where the ships are taking you back to, not to America. I believe I have used the text to demonstrate that the text is not shy to say that Egypt is the house of bondage. And we see how the text implies that by stating Egypt and then qualifying it as the house of bondage. When the text doesn't do that, Egypt can be a name of a person. Egypt can be a land mass. Let's have the text speak. Let's not twist it to fit our theologies. Shalom.